Guess we can go ahead and get started as everybody mingles in. Give them a few minutes. Isn't there a bell they ring? That they go out there and they ring a bell and it brings people in? Yeah. No. Well, I know Rachel needs to get back. Okay. So I want to start off with a little bit of a hallelujah, a little bit of a praise God. So I have my spring semester coming up, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to afford tuition for it. So I was praying about it, and I had gone through financial aid, and I just thought there wasn't any way, and I messaged them one last time, and I ended up getting a scholarship, like a pretty big scholarship, and so I just wanted to share that with everybody. God's good. Hallelujah. Praise God. So I'll be going this spring. I'll be at seminary, so that's cool. I guess we'll get into the announcements before we get started. Not many. So we have the men's barbecue tournament coming up. It's going to be next Saturday, the 27th. So there's over $1,000 in cash prizes. I know they don't have it up on the screen. There we go. So there's over $1,000 in cash prizes. They're going to have smoked barbecue. David O'Banion's going to be doing that. It is really, really good, so definitely come out at least for that. We're going to have a pool tournament, ping pong tournament, cornhole tournament. So pick your poison there. It starts at Good Point. It's not on here. What time? 12 noon. High noon. Okay, then the next one, annual business meeting. We got that? Okay, so that one, all members are welcome. It's going to be Sunday, January 28th at 12:15. That's going to be following this teaching, preaching, whatever it may be. Actually, I'm doing that, so it'll be a teaching. So we'll be following this, and all members are invited, go over financials, operations, kind of what's going on in the church, votes on certain things can take place. And then finally, we have baptism, which is next Sunday. If you are getting baptized, you're supposed to be in a baptismal class right now, but the baptisms will be here. We do them once a month, the last Sunday of each month, so no worry if you didn't get in this month. But that will be at our evening service, Sunday the 28th. If you are looking to get baptized, if you've been saved and you have not been baptized, you need to get baptized. If you're wanting to get baptized here, then please see one of our pastors. You can ask me, you can ask around. Somebody will definitely get you pointed in the right direction to make sure you're getting baptized. So today we're talking about healing. We have been going through our spiritual journey. We went from honesty, who we are, where we are, how we got there, being honest about our situation gives us a foundation for where we're going. Then we talked last week about reliance. As we're going down the path, things are going to try to get us off path. We need to make sure we're leaning on God the whole way through because God is the only way that we're going to get to where we need to go. So with healing, So I've got plenty of things that I can just go through and we can go scripture and I can make my points and everybody pays attention and we move on. I'd like for this to be a lot more interactive than that. So as we're going through, I'm going to be doing that. But if you have a comment, if you have a question, especially if you have some type of an anecdote or story about how God's healed you in your life, something that you would like to share, I'd encourage you to do that. That would make for a lot better use of our time here today. But we'll go ahead and get into it. What I'm going to do first to start highlighting healing, if you want to see healing in the Bible, I mean, you can almost open a page and just throw a dart, especially in the New Testament, because it's everywhere. So I picked some stories here. The first one, the main one that I picked is the story of Naaman. So Naaman is a commander of the Syrian army, and he's in very good favor with the king. He has won battles for him. The problem is that he has leprosy. So if we go to the first slide, 2 Kings 5:1, and if y'all want to follow in your Bibles as well, but I'll have them up on the screen. So Naaman, commander of the army of king of Syria, was a great man with his master and in high favor, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. So what we can take of this is that despite our strengths that we may have in life, everybody's going to have a flaw. And sometimes that flaw, it may only be one weakness that we have, but that one weakness we have can be a really big deal. So oftentimes I've found myself where I'm going through life, things are going okay, but there's that one thing that I don't want to address. I don't want to cop to it. I try to sweep it under the rug, but the whole time it's holding me back. So a lot of times I have to do some introspection, some prayer, and kind of clean my slate to be able to say, okay, what is this, and to be able to approach it properly, kind of with honesty and reliance like we talked in the first 2 weeks. So it's another thing that I could think of is like, why would God give all of these accomplishments and leprosy? I mean, if you notice, it says, because by him the Lord had been given victory to Syria. So he's given all these blessings and all these powers, but he has leprosy. So what we need to learn from that is that, and we'll find more as we're going forward, is that sometimes there's reasons for our weaknesses that we may not be aware of at the time. Lastly, out of this is that you need to remember that when you're a leper back then, you were completely cast out of society. You weren't allowed to be around anybody. You had to yell, unclean, unclean, if anybody got close to you. So you were as cast out could be. So you have this great commander. It's like a dichotomy. You have this great commander in good favor with the king, but he's this person that essentially society would cast out. So that's the dynamic that we have going forward. Anybody have anything on that? Okay. Next slide, 2 to 3. Now the bands of raiders from Aram. Aram is Syria, so just Syria. The translation, some translations will say Syria, some will say Aram. So this one just says Aram. Had gone out and taken captive of a young girl from Israel, and she served as Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. So our guiding to healing can come from anyone, even the lowly. A lot of times we'll have people in our lives that we just don't expect it. We don't expect these types of things from. It's not always somebody who's close to us or has authority over us, or that, we need, to have some type of peer relationship. Sometimes it's going to come from the people in your life that you least expect. And what I would say is just kind of have an open mind and an open heart to the people around you to make that possible for them to be able to affect you. So Naaman doesn't have an open heart or an open mind at this point. Let's see here. So this young girl, she does a really profound thing. She's concerned about the well-being of her master. So she's a slave to this person, yet she still has care. She has care for him. And we can care for others even if they have harmed us. And that keeps us free from our resentment. I've had people in my life who I could easily justify have done wrong things to me and have harmed me and all of these things. But if I sit there and I hold on to that, I'm going to be carrying resentments. And resentments will kill your spiritual life. You can't hold on to them. So you need to be free of that. And look what she's doing. I mean, she's not just sitting there, mentally saying, I forgive him. Or like, in my heart I've forgiven him, but I can't forget that, all the things that we like to do. She goes out and she actually puts forth action. Here's what you can do to be healed. So God bless her for that. So you can also remember that from the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Jesus also says, bless those who persecute you. So it separates the wheat from the chaff when it comes to Christians. How are you treating people who may not be the favorite people in your life? Okay. So Samaria is an unappealing place that Naaman must go to. So sometimes we have to heal by going into places or situations we would not normally want to avoid. I'm going to kind of get to the vulnerability here as well, which is kind of a theme to that. Sometimes when I'm in my comfort zone, I'm really not healing from anything. It's easy to be friends with people who are nice to you. It's easy to praise God when things are going well. It's, what are we going to be doing when we don't have a choice to go into some place or some situation that we would normally try to avoid, but we know that we have to do it to get there. So what do we use in order to go into that place? Like we've already talked about, honesty and reliance are the two things that we're going to need to go into those places or situations in order to be healed. So all of this hopefully is relating as we're going through it. Anything on that? Yep. Oh, we need a mic runner. Do we have a mic runner? Okay, well, yeah, I can go ahead until somebody gets it.
So way back in the day when I first started Al-Anon, I remember my first Al-Anon meeting and walking in, and a neighbor was in that room. And I was appalled because I thought, oh my gosh, she'll think whatever she might think. And as I was sitting there, I went, wait a minute, she's not here because everything's okay in her home either. And it was a real leveling place where it's like everybody has stuff. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that, because another thing that I want to stress on that is the community aspect of healing, which I'm surprised I haven't mentioned yet. That's one of the things that we can leverage here by sharing with each other. And also in situations like that is that we need each other to heal. And the church community, good, positive communities in general, really, really leverage that. Whenever I felt like I was alone, it was really hard to face my problems. So have people's encouragement, surround yourself with good people, and stay in the pack. Okay, so thank you. All right, so next slide, 4 to 6. Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means go, the king of Aram replied. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy. So his master, the king of Syria, Captain Crunch, right? Okay, so he's the king of Syria. And so here's the state of vulnerability. Another theme here is that we have to get vulnerable to heal. So he has to get vulnerable to ask permission. There may have been a backlash here. Sometimes you're going to go into situations where you have to fear, like if I want to go mend a fence with somebody for my healing, and I go up to them because I've done something wrong, they may not like that, and they may give me a backlash, but that doesn't mean that I'm not supposed to do it, because I know it's where I'm supposed to go. God's telling me that I need to do this to heal, and I have to heed that. You can find those with power to help, and be careful because at first you may have to be vulnerable in hopes God works through them. So the Abraham and Sarah story that I talked about last week, you've got Abraham, you've got his wife Sarah. They go and there's a king, and Abraham is scared that they're going to hurt Abraham if they know Sarah's his wife. So he says he's his sister. The king takes Sarah as his wife, has a dream, the king does, knows that it's actually Abraham's wife. He returns, the king returns Sarah to Abraham, and Abraham's basically saying, I'm sorry, I did it because I was scared of the repercussions that you may do something harmful to me, and I didn't know you were a man of God. So that is one of the things to keep in mind, is because we have to hope that God's going to work through other people, and we have to hope that God has rested on somebody's heart so that when we are vulnerable, that they'll be more understanding, that God softened their heart. If you've served and treated people well, they will help you. So here is Naaman. He's done all of these great things for the king. He's in very high favor. When you're treating people well, they'll be more prone to help you. As I was going through a lot of my trials, if I didn't have my good friends, if I didn't have people who I had hopefully in some way treated well, those were the people who could have the empathy for me, because they would know who I was and what I was capable of, and that I'm just trying my best. And a lot of times those people will reach out and give you a hand up should you have treated them well. So next one. Next slide. Okay. So moving along, as soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me. So the point behind that is that the king of Israel is thinking that the king of Syria is sending Naaman, and he's almost expecting him to cure him of leprosy. And if he doesn't, there's going to be some type of war or conflict. So he's not happy, thinking he's been put in this situation by this leper that has showed up. So sometimes we have to remember that our efforts to be healed are going to be misunderstood. Trying to stay the course. If other people aren't really getting where you're coming from, then hopefully, as you're going through those things, that they'll start to be aware of the point of your efforts. So hold strong if your efforts are being misunderstood. He did think it was going to lead to war. I guess that's what I had on that. So we could go to the next slide. Okay. So then when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elijah's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." So there's a lot in there. So there will be some who understand, who are better suited for your situations, who God may soften their heart. So Elisha he sees this from off to the side, and he says, "Hey, tells the king, don't worry about it. Send him to me. I got it. And not only do I got it, I'm going to have him believe that there's actually a prophet in the land of Israel. I'm going to secure his faith through my actions." So yeah, and so it's an opportunity for people to be shown that there is a power of God. That somewhere God can be found, and that you may be lost out there, but if you come here, God can be working. So you've got this guy who's a leper, and he's in front of this king who doesn't like him, and he has all this judgment, and so he's out there, but he has somebody in his life calling him and saying, "Hey, come over here, I can help you." And remember, that person was a man of God. He had that on his heart. Yes, he was a prophet, but a prophet's just a extreme man of God, I guess, for lack of a better term. So you have to remember that, putting God's love on our hearts enables us to do these things. And we have to find people around us who have hearts such as that, who have been touched by Christ. It's also our responsibility to try to go, and I'll talk about this next week, to go and try to touch the hearts of others by spreading God's love and spreading the gospel. So it's a very key component to notice here how God's love is working. So Naaman he still has all the power of the world. He has all of his accompanying forces. He's got his horses, he's got his chariots. There's no reason worldly why you would think this person needs to have help whatsoever. He's got all the power on a secular sense, but he is following somebody on his faith alone. He doesn't know Elisha. He doesn't know he's been sent to this land. He doesn't want to be there. He thinks the whole thing is silly. He doesn't think it's going to work. And now he's got this prophet saying, "I can help you, follow me." And so on faith alone, he has to follow this person. So when we're going through and we're on a path of trying to be healed, we're going to have to have faith to follow certain things. It's going to make us vulnerable. And where we know we're going to have to follow is just by following the way I do it is I pray, I try to ask for the Holy Spirit to guide me, and I listen to other people who I think are good Christians, and that guides me to where I need to go. Okay.
Bruce, although you mentioned that he seemed like he had everything he needed, yet he didn't have what he needed to heal him, right?
Right.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, absolutely. He didn't have what he needed to heal him. I mean, he could have won all the battles, had all the armies, gotten all the praise, but yeah, none of that was going to help him.
I've seen that happen in our day. The man has finally passed away now, but there was a man over in Nicholasville, probably the wealthiest man in Jessamine County. He had everything he needed, but yet his health, he got cancer, and he paid a hospital $1 million a year for every year it kept him alive. So you see how that changes people. And we see in our time, too, that sometimes people don't think about the Lord, and they get sick, and everything changes in their life. I'm talking about a sickness that can maybe bring death. Mm-hmm. And then they'll start seeking the Lord. Now, some will truly seek the Lord and live for the Lord after they're healed. Mm-hmm. Others will be healed. I've seen many times make promises to the Lord, and then they leave and don't live for the Lord after they're healed. Mm-hmm. And we got to remember the words of Jesus that he told the man at the pool of Bethesda: make sure you leave your sin, or something worse will happen to you. So that made me think of that when you brought up how he had everything he seemingly needed, but it didn't do him any good when his health was bad, and he was basically destitute with his health, and it was going to kill him.
Yeah, you can't buy your way out of some situations, and especially if they came from God, then how else could you rely on something that came from God other than asking God to help with it? So I appreciate that, Terry. Anybody else? Okay. So he's following somebody on faith alone, and sometimes we have the answer of healing right in front of us. So he gets specific instructions. It's not like he's having to wonder at this point what's going on. Elisha specifically says, here is what you need to do. Go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored and you will be cleansed. So sometimes we're going to have, as silly as we may think they are, and as much as we think they're not going to work, we have our instructions right in front of us. And sometimes we just have to go out and have that faith that Naaman's exhibiting now in order for that to be able to happen. In order for those things to take place, we've got to give God his traction. And if we have those types of instructions, then what a better way, and what a clearer way for us to follow and be thankful for that. So, okay, next one. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord, wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and went off in a rage. So we may have different expectations of others to heal us. Other things might be able to fix us easily. So he's saying, why do I have to come down here? I don't like it here. I'm in Israel. I don't like this land. We have these rivers in Damascus. I think they're better rivers. He's not happy. He goes off in a rage. And so a lot of times we want that easy fix. We would, like how he just wants something local in a place that he would want to go to. He wants to pick his fix for his healing. He wants to pick his cure. So it's kind of like, if I go on a retreat, or if I read this book, or if I take this class, all of that's going to heal me. However, what we're pointing out here is that the only thing that can heal you from spiritual problems and maladies such as this, and in this case a physical one, is going to be the power of Christ that we have to seek. So sometimes we say, I just want to go away. I just want it to go away. I'm frustrated. It's not happening on my terms. So a lot of this has to do with pride, having to humble yourself. A lot of this we talked about last week in reliance, that things aren't going to happen the way that I want them to. I cannot fit God into my circumstances or in my world. I can't make things just go away and be frustrated about it if they don't. I have to stick to a spiritual journey and follow the Word of God and rely on Him if I'm going to expect any of that to happen. And I have to humble my pride and get out of God's way. I'm either serving myself or I'm going to serve God, and at some point I have to make the decision to serve God. David is not paying attention.
I just thought this might be a good opportunity to share. Jamie won't share testimonies in front of big groups of people. He only does it with 1 or 2 people, so I'm going to share it for him. You're welcome. So like 11 years ago, Jamie hurt his wrist at work. And he's a sheet metal worker by trade, and so he uses his hands all day long. And long story, he was so injured that he should have been put on workers' comp, but they didn't do it. Instead, they worked him at 60% capacity. At the time, we had a 11, 9, 7, and 3-year-old, and we're living on 60% of his salary, and me working part-time. So it was very difficult. And so during this time, it kind of pushed him into a corner where he couldn't continue on doing this line of work because he physically couldn't do it. The doctors couldn't figure out what was going on. It was a whole thing. He was in a lot of pain for about a year. So we decided that we would start our own business because we didn't really have a choice at that point, and we didn't have any money either. But anyway, so he quit his job, union job, good job, even though he was only working 60% of the time. And the next weekend, we went to visit some friends in Indiana, and we went to church with them. And how many of y'all raised Pentecostal? Okay? So it can get a little wild here. This was wild to the next level. This is a wild Pentecostal church. Kind of even for us, it's like, okay, this is a lot. And they asked for prayer for if you needed healing. And so Jamie was obedient, and he went up to the altar and was hands laid upon him. And he was immediately healed. Touched his arm, pain was gone, went to PT the next day, range of motion was returned. And the reason it made me think of it was because we would have preferred a year ago the Lord had done that, right? Because he suffered for a year, and we suffered financially for a year. But sometimes God has to use painful situations to get us to take the paths that he wants us to take. And so once we kind of decided to, open our own business, then the Lord healed him, and you could see his hand in all of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Praise the Lord. I mean, it's a good way to see that, the Lord can work in our lives to create opportunities when we don't see them. A lot of times it just comes to like, hold on, have that reliance, kind of keep going on your journey because there may be something better for you. So I really appreciate that. And I don't know, I have some things that I may or may not share. We'll see how we get through these. So hopefully y'all can put more testimonies out there. I may or may not add one. So that could be, do what? Oh, yeah.
Sometimes we want God to move in the way we want him to move, and our pride gets in the way, and about stubbornness can get in the way. I remember the time when I had to forgive my dad for neglecting me when I was a child, and I didn't want to forgive him, but God was asking me to forgive him. And I didn't understand why I had to forgive when he abandoned me. But to realize that God was humbling me to move my pride out of the way and say, hey, if you want healing and if you want a new heart and me to use you as a vessel, you got to go forgive him. And that took a lot. It took me about 3 to 4 months to say yes, but I finally got there and got to forgive my dad. But once I forgave him, like Naaman, he wanted it done in his own way. I want it done in my own way, but it doesn't work that way because God's in control. So I just say sometimes our pride and our stubbornness get in the way till we can get healed. But once we move that pride and humbleness and humble ourselves, then our healing will come.
No, that's awesome. And to be able to see pride and humbleness and humility in that type of example is just awesome. And if we get to Job here, we'll see a little bit of that as well. But that's a perfect example also of being free of resentments and getting that freedom that only God can bring to us. But sometimes we have to, clean our side of the street, as they say. Anybody else? Yep. David, you want to go for it?
I think there's an element of surrender to all of it, too. I have found I deal with depression a lot and fight against it, and then finally just get on my knees and go, okay, God, this is in your court now. I can't fight anymore. And I find that surrender really goes a long way to healing.
Yeah, and I appreciate I've actually, this morning and yesterday, I've been having so much worry. At some point, you're like, I'm just done with, I can't even do it anymore, God. You have to take this because honestly, it's just wearing me out, and I'm done with it. And so, yeah, it's another way to rely on the Lord and find that strength that only I know that I can have. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't make it. I can put it that way. I have to have God with me on my side. And so, yeah, I totally appreciate that. All right. 11:12. But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Oh, hold on. No, I already read that. No, I haven't. Okay. I already read that. Okay, y'all are pleasantly distracting me with your stories. I really like it. Okay, so where was I? Pride, humble yourself. Yeah, exactly. I got to reinforce my points. Yeah. Okay, so if I came this way, it's supposed to work. We need to arrive at the right destination for God's power. So he's basically, if you go that far and you're not already getting the results that you want, it's really easy to get frustrated and not think that, if you just go a little bit farther, there might be something there. There's been times where I'll go down a path and you go down a path and it's like, okay, I'm just ready to stop and pick another path. And sometimes God wouldn't let me do that. And just a few steps farther down that path was the healing that I was looking for. So sometimes we just need to arrive at the right destination. And so I like this analogy. He's basically saying he's got all these tools in front of him to cleanse himself and to be healed, and they're all right there, and he doesn't like any of them. It's kind of like you're drowning and somebody throws you a lifesaver and you're like, this lifesaver's red. I really wanted a green lifesaver. It's like, that's not going to happen. You're going to grab onto whatever lifesaver they threw you because you're drowning. So that just reminded me that he's not taking that stance on everything, and he should probably humble himself more to not complain about his life raft. Okay. So 13, 14? Okay. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, 'Wash and be cleansed'?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. So, this is saying, if you'll do the things that serve you, why won't you do the things that heal you? The things that heal you are going to be much more important. So we're easy at serving the flesh. We'll go out of our way if it's going to give us glory or power or money or whatever we think we need in order to be happy in life. So if we're willing to do all of those things to obtain that, then why would we not put forth the effort to be healed? I mean, if I think about it, like all the tests you study for, or like the extra hours you put into work, and that extra day that you're gonna go in, so you hope you get that promotion or whatever it may be. I mean, you're doing those things for secular things. Why would you not want to put forth the effort towards spiritual things that will heal you in the most important way by your spirit and your relationship with God? We have to keep our eyes on what's important here. So the servant is the one who has the common sense in this. This is another thing about community, is that oftentimes the person who's not like embroiled in the situation will have a much clearer perspective on it. So if I'm down and I get stuck where I feel like there's no way out, or these people, I'm handling a situation based off of emotion or based off of a situation that I'm just reacting to and want to get out of, you can have a friend, somebody at church, somebody who has a clear mind, who you trust, who's going to come in and be able to give that kind of common sense to you. So be open to receiving that. That's very important. It's been important in my life. To make sure, to bounce those ideas off of somebody, or just to have them come in and help me with my situation. It's very healing. So Naaman followed instructions. So God's word are the instructions. Once again, we have our instructions. Are we going to follow it or not? A lot of times they're right there in front of us. So, it's just important to notice that when he finally gave in and gave faith to God, that he got his healing. Yeah, Terry.
I want to share a story from an old evangelist. It's not around anymore. But there was a flood. You all remember the flood, or some of you remember the flood that wiped Falmouth off the map back in 98, I believe it was, 97 or 98. And there's been many floods down the Ohio River. There was another one of those great floods that came up in one of the towns, and the fella had to get on top of his roof. It got so high and the water was still rising. He began to call out to the Lord, and Lord, work a miracle out for me to save me from this, that I won't drown. And after he prayed a little bit, a guy came by in a boat and said, hop in. I'm going to hop in here and I'll get you to safety. He says, no, I'm waiting for the Lord to send me a miracle. And then water is still rising. That guy leaves. I can't talk him into it. And here later, a guy in a little bigger boat came by and said, hey, hop in here. I'm going to take you to safety. And he said, no, I've prayed and God's going to send me a miracle. Well, then he's on the very tip top of the roof, and a helicopter comes and lets down the ladder and says, hey, grab a hold of the ladder and get up here and we'll take you to safety. He says, no, I'm waiting for God to send a miracle. Well, anyway, he doesn't go, and the guy drowns. So the way the story goes, evangelist, he says, in heaven, he said, Lord, I prayed to you. When he got to heaven, he says, Lord, I prayed to you to send me a miracle. And he said, son, I sent you 3 miracles. You turned them all 3 down.
Yeah, I mean, if the Lord's given us something, then, we have to make the most of it. And another thing is that the miracles may not come in the way that we think, but sometimes they're so obvious.
He was waiting for an angel to come
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you got to be sort of realistic about things. If I'm short of money and I there's not like a checks that are going to start falling from the sky, like there may be an opportunity for me to go remedy that situation, but I need God to give me like the vessel or the traction or something that I need, kind of the architecture from which I'm going to work. So yeah, that's a funny little story. I've heard that. Anybody else? Okay. So the world would now accept him. Yeah, oh, got another? Sorry, ma'am.
That's okay. This is a true story. It was my pastor at the time. This is when I was really young. He said that he went with another pastor to the hospital to visit someone who was very sick. And as he was going down the hall, there was a young boy laying on a gurney. And his mother said, "Oh, please pray for him. You know, it was something terrible, and they're going to have to do surgery, they're going to have to do this and whatever." And so he stopped and he just said, "Dear Lord, heal this boy," and walked on by. That was it. He did nothing else. The boy was completely healed and fine. And I often think of that because people think the longer they pray for somebody, the bigger the words, the bigger the person to pray for them. Somehow that is going to move the hand of God. And it's all about God. It isn't about that person praying for them at all.
Right. Yeah, and that reminds me when Jesus was saying, don't pray like the Gentiles who throw up numerous lofty words, that type of. I think it's also where he says pray in private. But yeah, when I had mentioned yesterday or last week or the week before when I was in that situation, and the only prayer that I said was, "God help, God please help." And that's all I really needed. And it was one of the more powerful prayers I've ever had, more powerful than any of the ones where I was explaining myself or going through my problems or anything like that. So sometimes just a quick, "God, I need help," is powerful. And it is a miracle to see some of the things that, medically are impossible. The more you kind of go down and look into those things that where God has truly stepped in and healed people, it's pretty amazing. So praise that. Okay, so one thing I do want to notice, I don't think I highlighted it yet. So when you're cured of leprosy, all of a sudden, no, I'm about to get to it. You're going to be able to, when you're now accepted, you're healed, you function better in a society when, I guess it's kind of self-explanatory. Once you have gotten to a point where you're stable and you're on a good footing and you've become, essentially in a better spot, people are going to be able to read off that. I'm always big about people noticing our actions and trying to emulate us, and so that's another positive way that the world's going to want you around, by you being that example. So healing is very important, not just for yourself. It removes afflictions that can impede your ability to be good for others as well. All right, next slide. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know there is no God in all the world except in Israel, so please accept a gift from your servant." One thing I like to point out there is that back in 8-10, it says, "So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house, and Elisha sent a messenger to say to him." So Naaman's coming to basically the threshold of his door. Elisha's back there and will only send a messenger to him. And then right now it says he stood before him. So now he's cleansed and he can actually stand before Elisha. I thought that was just something I noticed. I thought that was pretty interesting to see the change there, even in the action and the story. So Elisha followed God, and God gave him the ability to instruct those back towards God to allow God to work. One of my favorite parts of the Bible is in James, where it talks about anybody who brings a sinner back will be forgiven for a multitude of sins. It's a really great way for us to show our faith and to be good Christians. We're good, we hold each other accountable, we're here for us. But when we go out and we start affecting others in ways that we can bring people towards God and allow God to work, that's really a beautiful thing. And that's what we need to do when we're spreading the message and following the Great Commission, which once again we'll get to next week. So God is everywhere. This time, so he goes to Israel to be cured. We have to remember that God's everywhere, and we must not think his gifts are limited for certain places or for certain people. But environments and peoples who allow God to work in them sometimes can be better suited to receive his blessings. So Israel at this time was being, I guess, a fairly holy place. They weren't, conquered at the time. Usually they're conquered when they turn their backs on God, and then they're not conquered when they're following him. They do this whole back and forth thing all throughout their history. So that, and then Elisha with the point I was making, people who allowed God to work in their community and in their hearts is just kind of saying that the example that Elisha set, the fact that God was working in him, had softened his heart, makes it a lot more conducive to have a community and to make everything better to receive God's blessings. And because of that, we will be grateful. That's another big thing that he's showing here. Now he's saying, now I know there is no God in all the world except in Israel, so please accept a gift from your servant. So he's very grateful, so much that he wants to actually give back as if he almost owes them for their work. But we'll find out in the next one. Okay. The prophet answered, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. So what we can get pretty clear there is this one main point, is that God only wants obedience. There's no way that we're going to chip back in or buy our way into something, or there's some other action that we can take. What God really wants from us is our obedience to his word, our obedience to completely rely upon him. The point of us being here is for the enjoyment of our Creator. And so in that obedience, we secure our covenants with him. We have that relationship with him. We follow his word. We get his benefits. And so I just want to make sure, personally, I take that as just making sure I'm staying where God wants me and I'm being obedient. I'm not trying to rebel from his word. I'm not trying to satisfy my flesh. I'm sticking with him because I need him, and he's the only one that will heal me in the way that I need to be healed. Next slide. If you will not, said Naaman, please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry. For your servant will never again make burnt offerings or sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, I have to bow down there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this. Go in peace, Elisha said. So a few points on that. First is, remember what changed you and where you became rooted. What he's doing here when he says, giving as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, he's wanting to take the earth from Israel back to Syria because he thinks, it's special. That's where he got healed. That's where he got saved. So I'm just using that imagery as, remember where you're rooted. In my, during my life, my struggles, I went from way up here to way down here, and that's where I got my spiritual foundation, and that's where I got my roots. And now I'm kind of, up a little bit especially from where I was. But I have to remember where I came from. I have to remember those roots, because it's real easy for me to start thinking that God didn't work for me then. Not only is it like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. It's like, okay, well, he got me through that. He's going to get me through this. And then also I need to realize when I'm taking things for granted, when I went for a long time sleeping places that weren't my own bed, I feel every night when my head hits the pillow, I'm just grateful that it's my pillow and it's a good one and that it's in my bed under my roof. And there's a backstory obviously to all of that, but I'm very grateful for the small things. But as soon as I start sitting there thinking, I had to fix a leak in my roof, or, the house has a spot where it doesn't get warm enough, and I start complaining about things, it's like, whoa. Remember where you were when you were sleeping nowhere, where you were outside, where you were on your friend's couch. That leaky roof is a blessing. I can fix that. I have a roof. So anyways, that really changed me, and I always have to remember that. Next point would be to honor your healing God. So he's You know, he's saying, I'm never going to do this again, never burnt sacrifices or offerings to anybody other than you. So he's got that experience. He's been healed. He realizes where it came from. And so he's returning the honor to God for that. Once again, nationality and status does not limit God's healing power. You have to remember back then, you know, you got the Syrians and the Israelites and the Philistines and the Canaanites and the Babylonians and all these people and the Samaritans, and they don't like each other. And so a lot of times people will think, well, God's just for me. You know, this relationship with God's for me, and therefore for other people they're not godly, or we need to have some type of resistance, or God's not going to bless them. But this clearly shows you got a guy from Syria going to Israel to be healed by an Israelite who wants to take Israel back to Syria. And so we just have to remember that God's everywhere and he doesn't discriminate. So, do y'all know Meatloaf's song, I Would Do Anything for Love? Y'all remember that? I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that. So if you notice here, he's saying, I'm not going to do these things. I'm not going to make burnt offerings or sacrifices. I'm taking this land with you. But when I go into the temple with this guy, he has power over me. And when he bows down to worship, I'm going to have to bow down with him. I hope that's okay, is essentially what he's saying. So, and then go in peace, Elisha said, which, okay, so apparently he didn't put up a front. But what I want to get thoughts from y'all. Do you think it's okay to make an exception such as this, where you're honoring God, but then because of this one thing that you're fearful of, or this one situation that you're going to be put in, say, God, please forgive me because I'm going to go along with this, knowing that you've done this for me and knowing that I'm going to do all these other things to honor you. Give me this little caveat, this little out, if you will, that I don't have to abide by. So does anybody have any thoughts on like whether that's okay, an example of how that's worked? I just think that's a pretty good open-ended thing there. Thanks, David.
I think I've, in the past, like tried to make deals with God and been like, oh, well, you know, I'll do this, but can you just do this for me? You know, he doesn't work that way. He's not on our time. He's not, it's not up to us. And I think that so many people really get caught up in that, like, oh, well, I really want this, but I'll do that if you do this, you know, kind of thing. And it just doesn't work that way.
It's not like a tit for tat, like a deal. Like I'm trying to cop a deal with God sometimes, you know? And yeah, you're right. It just doesn't work that way.
He knows how stubborn I am, so, you know, well, you're just going to have to drop it in my lap.
Right. Well, and it's the whole honest thing we talked about in the first week. It's like he knows what you're thinking. You're not going to get away with it, you know? So, cool. Anybody else have thoughts on that? There you go, Terry. And Sarah.
Well, we've got a couple of things going there. He's made an allegiance that he's going to serve God and follow God, and even took some of the earth back that he'd never forget what happened there. And to understand what he's saying in the next passage there, we got to understand the times. And you even get a hint of that in the letters of Paul, when Paul told servants that they had to be faithful to their master and honor them even if they didn't agree with their master. And but in all other things, seek to be free and to put God first in everything. So we see here what a lot of people don't realize, even though this was a great general, the king was his master. The king could remove him immediately. So he was basically a slave to the king, even though he had high honor. Kind of like what you might have saw with Joseph and Pharaoh. Joseph was the second highest in the land. This general, it looks like maybe was the second highest in the land, but he still had to answer to the king. So I believe what he is trying to say, and Elijah blessed it by saying, go in peace, that I am not, he says, I think what he's saying, I know Rimmon is not God, and his temple is nothing, but I have to go in with my master, and I'm taking that when he says he's leaning on his arm, that the king might have been very elderly, expected the general to go in with him and to let him worship. But in all of this, I'm thinking with all he'd done, we can still show God's love and reach people. And all we could hope for is that his testimony, what God done to him, would finally reach that king, and he would quit going in the temple of Rimmon. And I believe that's why that ends there, that Elijah said, "Go in peace." Says, and I believe what Naaman said before is, I'm not going to serve Rimmon anymore. I'm serving God. I know who the real God is. So we see that mixture there, and I think what we see in the letter of Paul when he told slaves to be obedient to their masters, even if they were not good masters. So that's something we got to take into account for all that. If we have the full freedom to serve God, we shouldn't even go of Rimmon or any other temple to serve. He, being a servant of the king, may not have the choice. If he had his freedom, if he was made completely free, he should not go in there. And any of us, when we make excuses to do something, and we are in control of that situation, we shouldn't do it. We should put God first in everything. And that was my take on that. That's why Elijah at the end said, "Go in peace."
No, yeah, and absolutely, a lot of times, that's a very good point where he does say, "Obey your master." And that I could see how that would absolutely give him, I don't want to say an out, but it would make sense as far as why this would need to be done. I'll put my thoughts in on it, but let's go along those lines. Who else? Yep.
I was just thinking the part of he was confessing. He was confessing that, hey, I'm going to worship you, Lord. I know you the one who heals me. But he was confessing to the prophet of his shortcomings. And he's letting God to ask him before he even go back to where he's from and where he bows down to forgive him. So he's confessing. So I was looking at how Elisha was asking, go in peace. It's because she was confessing his sin, what's already happened.
Yeah.
And so maybe God would be the one who, like it does, take us through the process of getting healed. And it takes time, little by little, with God's grace. But that's what he was doing with, that's what I would look at that story.
Yeah.
That's why he said, go in peace.
Gotcha. No, it's a really good take. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I said, what about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They were slaves and they would not bow.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, because even so back in the early church when they were being persecuted, there were some people who just straight up said, I'm not going to deny the faith, and died. And not kind of died, horrible deaths died. And then there were some who would say they would renounce their faith to save their life. And then once the persecution stopped, they wanted to join the church again. And there was this huge disagreement about should somebody who denied their faith be allowed to be back in the church. So there is a lot of that, how far do you go and how much is God going to give you that grace to say, hey, I love you, but in this situation, can you kind of, I have to serve my master, or, am I going to sit there and absolutely not bow down to any other God? I think there was some in the Babylonians who would refuse to bow down to the Babylonian God, right? And got in trouble for that.
Well, on the take for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, we serve God first, and then we serve our masters. So,
No?
if our masters are telling us otherwise, then we do what we need to do to serve God first.
Got one?
And we even have currently in our culture where things are happening and people will quit their jobs rather than go along with the culture. And you have other people who are Christians who don't do that. And who's to say one right or one wrong? It's a hard situation.
Right.
And we don't always know all the circumstances. But where I finally get to is God knows everybody's heart. And that's what it's all about, is what the heart is about.
Yeah.
And God knows, and he judges our hearts, not other believers or human beings.
Yeah. That's a good point. The knowing your heart part, that's a good angle on it as well. Who else? Yeah, I kind of agree with all of that, to a degree. It's really, so I would like to think, if it was boiling down to me and I'm facing some horrible death, and I would probably say, God, forgive me, but I can do more work not dying than I would dying, so can you let me have a little grace on this one? My heart, I love you. But at the same time, I'm still not putting him first, and so that's a really tough call. I think about the people in the early church who were, crucified. It wasn't just Jesus. Like that crucifixion was a popular way to kill people that they didn't like, and that they would totally do it, early on out of their faith. And it's like, am I that kind of Christian? Would I have that kind of faith? And it just makes me do some introspection as to how deep my faith is. So.
Hey,
Uh-huh.
I have a question.
Yep.
I'm just kind of thinking here, like, Elisha. Like, why wouldn't he say, no, bruh? No. We don't do that.
Yeah.
You've made a new commitment. And there's, like, I'm kind of like, what's up with him? Like, that's what I'm just thinking in this whole thing. Anyway, what's your opinion?
No, I was thinking that too. I mean, I got to that point and I'm like, go in peace. And I was thinking, well, yeah, it's like, well, God just gave you all this healing, like, maybe stop going to that temple. You're saying you're not going to worship false gods.
No, I don't.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And that's a really good question that you could. Yeah, I probably could have dove into that a bit more when I was prepping, but I'm right there with you.
I think the difference here with Naaman and Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and with others, and with what Paul was talking about with the slaves to be obedient to their masters, is here, I believe Naaman was telling him, I'm not going to worship Rimmon anymore. I know he's not God. Matter of fact, he said that. I know there's no other God except the God that's in Israel. And I believe what he was asking for permission was, when the old king wanted him to accompany him in there, that to let him bow down, he basically said, I'm not going to worship him, but I'm going to be there and have to bow down with him. Where the difference was with Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, their bowing down, that they were going to be forced to bow down, was bowing down unto an idol and to worship the idol. And I can see that point there too. We should not worship an idol. We shouldn't bow down to and say, I'm worshiping this idol, or sing to that idol when they play the accompaniment, because that's what everybody was called there for then. So I think that was the difference there. And I think that's what Paul in the letters to the Corinthians and to the other churches was trying to tell the slaves. But because of their good testimony to still be obedient to their masters, they can reach them for Christ, which many of them did. And we still see in this present day that we're very blessed in our nation, but there's nations that we know through our missionaries where people are held as slaves, and they have to do very ungodly things. And so they have two things. They can kill themselves, which that would be a sin also, or their masters take great advantage of them. And probably one of the most notoriety of cases was the young lady. I don't know if she was from down in Kentucky or Tennessee or Alabama. They just did a memorial to her not too long ago that this happened about 5 or 6 years ago, that she had went as just 19 or 20 and was helping in an orphanage, and it was in Syria or one of the countries there, and who was in power then? Anyway, the rebel Muslim group, I forgot their name, came in and they carried her away. ISIS, I believe it was, yes. And she was repeatedly raped. She was forced to marry and have a baby, and then eventually she did die. So in that case, and where she was not allowed to mention Jesus, yet she was a very godly woman, and they even found some of her writings after that. Was she sinning? Or was she just trying to hold on,
Right. Is that like, what, do I think she was sinning?
Yeah, so...
Yeah, it's complicated.
When you're forced, and if I remembered her name, you'll probably remember her. This just happened, and it made worldwide news that she was captured. Well, what I'm saying is they took her away. They forced her to marry a Muslim man, and they kept and they repeatedly raped her before that. Yeah.
Yeah, she's saying, what did the woman do
Well,
wrong?
that's the same thing I believe here. What is he doing wrong if he's just accompanying his master in there, but he's not worshiping Rimmon, but he's coming down to let him worship. And I believe that's why that says go in peace.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. That young lady did nothing wrong. She had to do to the best of her ability for what she had. She was a very godly young lady. She just was put in that place of a war and was captured along with all the children. So we see those things happen. So that's why I was saying she didn't do anything wrong. I don't think he did anything wrong. I think that he believed in God. But I think if we had the freedom, if he'd had the freedom not to do that, he would have been wrong. If this young lady would have had the freedom not to do that, she didn't, she would have been wrong. And that's why I think Paul was saying in the Bible, you still have to be obedient to your slave masters, but also seek to be free when you have the opportunity.
Yeah, in those situations, I mean, sometimes it's just easy to say, I would do this, but until you're in that situation, it's kind of hard to know maybe how you would act in keeping your faith there and trying to juggle that. I have my faith, but these are my circumstances, and how am I going to navigate that fine line? I couldn't imagine being in a situation that was that serious, that put my faith in that much jeopardy. So, just praise God that hasn't happened. I hope that we don't ever get in a situation like that ourselves, but I totally see where you're coming from.
Sorry, I kind of lost track of thought there for a second. Ultimately, I think my overall opinion is it's going to be between that person's heart and God. When it comes down to it, and who am I to judge? Every situation is unique. But I do keep coming back to the idea that you're winging the temple, you're bowing down. And I think about things that we teach here. Showing up to church doesn't do anything for you. Going through the motions doesn't do anything to you. It's got to be what's in your heart. If I just show up here, does that make me a Christian? No.
Right.
If I come in and sit there and pretend to pray, and I'm not saying anything the entire time, I'm not opening up my heart to God, am I a Christian? No. But am I here? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I kind of think about that the same way. You're going through the motions to save your life. And in truth, can you be out spreading the word beyond that, introducing other people to God? Yes. I think it's really what's in your heart moving forward. And you're in a very tough situation. And I see every side here. I completely understand, but I think, again, my overall answer is it's between that person's heart and God.
Yeah. And that's a good answer. When I was younger and I would go to church, I was a Christian, but, I was just I was born into a Christian household, and it's like I go to church and I'll check that box, I'm a Christian or whatever. But it wasn't until, now I know the difference of your heart, and are you going, and God knows He softened my heart, and I'm putting forth the effort because I'm listening to Him. And I would like to think that knowing what I've been trying to do with my heart for Him would be seen in a situation such as that. So I think that's kind of where you're getting. Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that, yeah. Anybody else? Okay. We're at 12:06. I am very proud of myself, I will brag. I didn't want to run out of material, so I had 17 pages and we got to 8. So, well done. I'm very glad that y'all interacted. Thank you so much for that. I talk fast, and I try to slow down. So well done this week. Thank you. Okay, I have the cheat sheet if y'all are wanting to know what the answers were. We had the ability to heal by approaching situations we would want to avoid with honesty and resilience. Oh, is it resilience or reliance? I think it's for reliance. That's what we did last time. Asking permission leaves you vulnerable. Sometimes our efforts are misunderstood. Worldly power still needs faith. You will do things that serve you. Why not those that heal you? God only wants obedience. Jesus' ultimate healing is salvation. Even Jesus calls on the Father for help. Oh, we haven't even gotten to that. That's why it was on there. Because Job was the next thing. And so if you just want to put it in there, Job does not understand God's path, but he upholds integrity. So So yeah, Joe would have been next, but we got through Naaman's story. I thought that was a pretty good story. Does anybody have anything else before we wrap up? Okay, we'll close in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for bringing us here today, for giving us such a beautiful community and fellowship. Please help us take any lessons that we may have learned along with us today and this week. Please help us heal in all the ways that only you can heal us. Help show us where we need to go to rely on you. Lead us, give us our paths, keep us upright and strong. Help us never give up. As long as we have the power, your power in us, we know that we can accomplish anything. So please heal our hearts. Help us enjoy each other's company. Help us come back tonight for a really good service. And